Picture a busy software development team working in a modern office in Mumbai. They are standing around a whiteboard and the manager is leaning in, demanding to know exactly how many hours it will take to build a new login feature. The lead developer sighs, knowing that giving an hour-based estimate is a recipe for disaster. This is the hours trap, the most common mistake in project management. In the Disciplined Agile framework, we move away from this because humans are notoriously bad at predicting time. We are optimistic creatures. We always assume everything will go perfectly, forgetting about the server updates, the team meetings, and the inevitable bugs. When we guess in hours, we aren't estimating, we are gambling. Instead, we use story points, which are defined as a metric to estimate the difficulty, complexity, and effort required to implement a user story. To put that in simple, more natural terms, it is a way to rank work based on how heavy it feels compared to other tasks. Imagine you are asked to guess the weight of a heavy suitcase. If you guess 15 kilograms, you might be completely off. But if you hold that suitcase and compare it to a bag of rice or a heavy dumbbell, you can quickly say, this is heavier than the rice but lighter than the dumbbell. That is relative estimation. By moving away from precise hours and toward relative points, we stop the guessing game and start focusing on the actual size and weight of the challenge. So now that we've mastered the core realization that hours are a trap and relative sizing is our way out, you might be wondering how we actually assign these points without getting lost in abstract numbers. Well, that brings us right into our next step, the Fibonacci sequence and how to use it. Stay with me here because this is where the math becomes surprisingly helpful and practical for the real world. In Agile, we don't use every single integer when we estimate. We use a famous mathematical pattern called the Fibonacci sequence, which looks like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. The formal definition is that we use this sequence to acknowledge that the larger a task gets, the more uncertainty and hidden risk it contains. Put simply, the difference between a 1-point task and a 2-point task is easy to see. But the difference between a 13-point task and a 14-point task is almost impossible to distinguish. By forcing ourselves to jump from 8 to 13, we are acknowledging that a task has become too large and too risky to be done in one piece, so it must be broken down. Think about the chore of cleaning your entire home. Picking up a few books from the floor is a quick 1-point task. Vacuuming the entire living room is a moderate 3-point task. But cleaning the entire garage after a winter of storage where you don't know what kind of mess is hidden in the corners, that is clearly an 8 or 13-point task. If you try to tell yourself that the garage is a 4-point task, you are kidding yourself. The Fibonacci sequence protects us from our own natural optimism. So now that we've mastered why we use this special number scale to handle uncertainty, you might be wondering how a group of people with different opinions and different technical backgrounds ever manages to agree on a single number. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the collaborative art of planning poker. You have probably seen this dysfunction at the office. A manager walks into the room, points at a complicated technical task, and decides that will take 3 days. The team feels frustrated because they know it is much harder than that, but they stay quiet to avoid conflict. Planning poker solves this by turning estimation into a team sport. The definition of planning poker is a consensus-based, gamified technique for estimating the effort or relative size of development goals. In simple words, it is a way to get everyone's voice heard at the exact same time, preventing the loudest voice in the room syndrome. Imagine your team is estimating a new feature for your app. Everyone holds up a card with a number. If one person holds up a 1 and another person holds up an 8, you don't just average the numbers and move on. You stop and ask, why did you think it was a 1? And why did you think it was an 8? Usually the person who said 8 knows about a hidden technical risk or a piece of messy code that the other person missed. It isn't about being right, it is about sharing knowledge. You are playing to uncover the hidden complexities that would have ruined your schedule later on. So now that we have mastered how to use this game to build team consensus, you might be wondering how we decide what counts as a baseline or a standard for our points so we aren't just making it up. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the importance of having a reference story. If you have never seen a story point before, how do you know what a 3-point task looks like? You need an anchor. A reference story or a baseline is defined as a well understood, completed task that the team uses as a standard to compare all future work against. Think of it like this. If you are a chef in a busy kitchen, you need to know what a standard simple salad looks like before you can judge if a complex buffet dish is twice as hard or 3 times as hard to make. You pick one task that everyone on the team agrees is a medium task. Let's call it a 3. And every time you estimate a new task, you ask, is this harder or easier than that 3? By keeping this anchor visible, you ensure that your estimates stay consistent over time. It doesn't matter if your points seem large or small compared to another team in the company. What matters is that your team remains internally consistent with itself. It provides the stability that turns estimation from a guess into a science. So now that we've mastered the need for a reliable anchor, you might be wondering how to avoid the common mistake of trying to convert these points into hours for the sake of reporting. Well, that brings us right into our next step, the dangers of velocity misinterpretation. This is the exact point where many Scrum Masters go wrong. They start treating velocity as a performance metric to punish or pressure the team. Velocity is technically defined as the amount of work a team can tackle during a single sprint, measured by the sum of the story points. In simple human terms, it is just a capacity guide. Think of your team like a car on a long road trip. Velocity is your average speed. If you know you usually drive 60 km per hour, you can predict when you will arrive in the next city. But if you try to force the car to go 120 km per hour because a manager thinks it looks better or is more productive, you will eventually crash the engine. Velocity is for the team to use for planning their own work, not for the boss to use for pressure. It tells you, based on our history, we can handle about 30 points of work this sprint. It is a tool for honesty, transparency, and predictability. Nothing more, nothing less. So now that we've mastered how to use velocity as a helper rather than a weapon, you might be wondering how to keep these estimates from becoming stagnant as the team grows, learns, and gets better at their work. Well, that brings us right into our next step, the ongoing process of refinement. Finally, we have to recognize that your team is not a static, unfeeling machine. You are a living, breathing group of people who are constantly learning. Refinement is the process of reviewing and updating your product backlog, which includes re-estimating stories as you learn more about the technical challenges involved. It is an ongoing conversation, not a one-time event. You have seen this at the office, where a task that looked easy on paper suddenly becomes a nightmare once you dig into the old, messy code. In those cases, you don't stick to your original estimate out of stubborn pride. You update it. You use that new information to make your next plan even better. Story points are not a contract signed in blood. They are a living estimate that evolves as your knowledge grows. We have moved from the trap of hours to the power of relative sizing, the deep collaboration of planning poker, the stability of reference stories, and the healthy human use of velocity. You now have the full toolkit to make your project planning not just more accurate, but truly human-centric, collaborative, and sustainable.